I pulled into my driveway after 3 exhausting weeks in Singapore, jet-lagged and desperate for my own bed, only to find a silver minivan parked where my car should be and children's toys scattered across my front lawn. My house in Riverside, California looked lived in, which would have been normal except I lived alone and had locked everything up tight before my business trip. My name is Ethan Porter, and I'm a software consultant who travels frequently for work. I had purchased my modest 3-bedroom ranch house 2 years ago in the Meadowbrook community, a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and an unfortunately aggressive homeowners association. The HOA had been a nuisance since day one, sending violation notices about my trash cans being visible from the street and my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall. But this was different. This was insane. I sat in my rental car for a moment, staring at the unfamiliar minivan and the pink tricycle lying on its side near my mailbox. The living room curtains were open, and I could see movement inside. Someone was definitely in my house. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and scrolled to my security camera app. I had installed cameras at the front door, back door, and garage 6 months ago after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. The app showed nothing. All 3 cameras were offline. I climbed out of the car, my legs stiff from the 14-hour flight, and approached my front door. Before I could reach it, the door swung open and a woman in her early 30s stood there holding a dish towel. She had blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and wore yoga pants with a stained T-shirt. Behind her, I could hear children laughing and the sound of a television. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was the one who didn't belong here. "Can you help me?" I repeated, incredulous. "This is my house. Who are you and why are you in my home?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Your house? No, we're renting this place. We signed a 6-month lease 3 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. "You what? From who?" "The homeowners association," she said, looking genuinely confused now. "They said the owner had defaulted on HOA fees, and they had the right to lease it out to recover the costs. We paid first month, last month, and a security deposit. I have paperwork." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I never defaulted on anything. I pay my HOA fees automatically every month through my bank. There must be some mistake." A man appeared behind the woman, tall and broad-shouldered with a protective stance. "What's going on, Jennifer?" "This man says he owns the house," Jennifer said, wringing the dish towel in her hands. "I don't just say it, I do own it," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Look, I don't know what you were told, but someone has made a serious error. I need to contact the HOA immediately. Do you have the name of who you dealt with?" Jennifer disappeared inside and returned a moment later with a folder. She handed me several papers, and I scanned them quickly. The lease agreement bore the Meadowbrook HOA letterhead and was signed by Patricia Holloway, HOA president. I knew Patricia. She was a 52-year-old woman with short brown hair, always styled in that specific way that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She had personally delivered half of my violation notices, seeming to take pleasure in pointing out every minor infraction. "This lease is fraudulent," I said, handing the papers back. "I never authorized anyone to rent my property." "We paid $12,000, Jennifer's husband said, his voice rising. "If this is some kind of scam." "It is a scam, but not by me," I said quickly. "Your victims too." "I'm going to sort this out, but I'm sorry you can't stay here. This is my home." "We have nowhere else to go," Jennifer said, her eyes filling with tears. "We sold our condo and all our stuff is inside, our kids." I ran my hand through my hair, exhaustion and anger warring inside me. "How much stuff?" "Everything we own," she said. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Okay, look, give me a few hours. Don't unpack anything else. I'm going to the HOA office right now and getting to the bottom of this, but I want to be clear you're going to have to leave. Today. I didn't wait for a response. I got back in my car and drove the half-mile to the Meadowbrook Community Center, where the HOA maintained a small office. It was Sunday afternoon, and I knew the office would normally be closed, but I also knew that Patricia Holloway treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom and often worked weekends. The parking lot was empty except for a white Lexus SUV that I recognized as Patricia's. The office door was locked, but I could see lights on inside. I pounded on the glass door. After a moment, Patricia appeared, her face registering surprise and then something that looked almost like fear before she composed herself into her usual expression of vague superiority. She opened the door a crack. "Ethan, I thought you were traveling." "I was. I came home to find strangers living in my house. Strangers you apparently rented my property to." Her face flushed. "You defaulted on your HOA fees. We sent multiple notices." The bylaws clearly state that in the event of default, the HOA has the right to take possession of the property to recover debts owed. "I didn't default on anything," I said, pushing past her into the office. "My HOA fees are paid automatically every single month." "Show me these notices you supposedly sent." Patricia moved to a filing cabinet, her movements jerky and nervous. She pulled out a folder with my address on it and handed it to me. Inside were copies of 3 notices, each claiming I owed escalating amounts for unpaid HOA fees, starting at $300 and ending at $2,200 with late fees and penalties. "These are dated while I was in Singapore," I said. "I never received any of them. And even if I had, my fees are current. I can show you bank statements." "The notices were sent to your address via certified mail," Patricia said, lifting her chin. "If you didn't receive them, that's not our problem. Perhaps you should have made arrangements for mail forwarding during your extended absence. 3 weeks is not an extended absence, and certified mail requires a signature." "Who signed for these?" Patricia shuffled through the papers. "They were returned as undeliverable, which under the bylaws counts as proper notice. You're responsible for maintaining a current address." "My address is current. I live there, or I did until you illegally rented it out." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Patricia said quickly. "The lease is entirely legal under the HOA bylaws. If anyone is in violation, it's you. And if you cause problems for the tenants, you'll be liable for damages. The tenants you fraudulently placed in my home, not fraudulently." We followed proper procedures. "If you believe there's been an error, you're welcome to appeal to the HOA board at our next meeting." "When is that?" 3 weeks from Tuesday." I stared at her. "You want me to wait a month while strangers live in my house?" "We want you to follow proper procedures, just as we did." I could feel my hands shaking with rage. "Where did the rent money go?" "It was applied to your outstanding balance and administrative fees. The remainder will be held in escrow pending resolution of your account." "I want a full accounting, every dollar, and I want the tenants out of my house today." Patricia smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "The tenants have a valid lease. You can't simply evict them without cause. That would be illegal. They're in my house without my permission. That's called trespassing. They have written permission from the HOA, which has authority over the property per the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased your home." I pulled up my banking app on my phone and showed her the screen. "Here. Automatic payment to Meadowbrook HOA, $300, processed on the 1st of every month including last month and the month before. I'm current. I've always been current." Patricia barely glanced at the phone. "Our records show different. Perhaps there was a processing error." Regardless, notices were sent and procedures were followed. This isn't my problem. You're making it my problem, which means it's definitely your problem. I pulled out my phone again. I'm calling my attorney. It's Sunday evening, Patricia said. Good luck with that. She was right, but I tried anyway. My attorney, David Reeves, didn't answer. I left an urgent voicemail explaining the situation and asking him to call me back immediately. I turned back to Patricia. This isn't over, not by a long shot. The board meeting is 3 weeks from Tuesday, she repeated. 7 p.m. right here. Until then, I suggest you find somewhere else to stay. I left the office before I said something I would regret. On the drive back to my house, I called my bank and confirmed that all my HOA payments had cleared. The customer service representative emailed me PDF statements showing every transaction. Everything was in order on my end. When I pulled back into my driveway, Jennifer was standing outside with her husband and 2 small children, a boy and a girl who looked about 4 and 6. They had packed nothing. Instead, they looked like they were waiting for me. We called the number on the lease, Jennifer said as I approached. Patricia Holloway. She said you're in default and we have every right to be here. She said if you harass us, we can call the police. She's lying, I said flatly. But I understand you're in a tough spot. You paid money in good faith. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get a hotel room for tonight because I'm too tired to deal with this anymore today. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to my lawyer and then I'm going to the police. This is fraud, and Patricia Holloway is going to face consequences. I suggest you contact a lawyer too, because you're going to want to recover your money. We can't afford a lawyer, Jennifer's husband said. We spent everything we had on this place. I felt a wave of sympathy despite my anger. Then document everything. Keep all your paperwork, all your text messages, everything. You're going to need it. I drove to a Hampton Inn 3 miles away and checked in for the night. The room was generic and sterile, nothing like my own comfortable bed, but at least it was mine. I ordered room service, took a long hot shower, and tried to process what had happened. Someone had deliberately falsified HOA records to claim I was in default, then rented out my property and pocketed the money. This wasn't an administrative error. This was theft. And Patricia Holloway was at the center of it. I woke up Monday morning with renewed determination. My attorney, David Reeves, called me back at 8 a.m. I explained everything while he took notes, occasionally interrupting to ask questions. This is pretty brazen, David said when I finished. HOAs do have broad powers under California law, but they can't just seize your property and rent it out based on falsified default notices. We need to move fast. I'm going to file for an emergency injunction this morning to get the tenants out and restore you to possession. We'll also file a civil suit against the HOA and Patricia Holloway personally for fraud, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty. How long will that take? The injunction hearing should happen within a few days. The lawsuit will take longer, months probably. But Ethan, you need to understand something. Even if we win, getting money out of an HOA can be tricky. They might not have enough in their accounts to cover damages. Then we go after Patricia personally. We'll try. But if she claims she was acting in her official capacity as HOA president, piercing that corporate veil will be challenging. She committed fraud, David. She falsified records and stole my property. I agree, and we'll make that case. I'm also going to recommend you file a police report. This crosses the line from a civil dispute into criminal activity. After I hung up with David, I drove to the Riverside Police Department. The officer at the front desk directed me to a Detective Sarah Chen, who specialized in fraud cases. I sat in a small interview room and explained the situation for what felt like the 100th time. Detective Chen listened carefully, occasionally typing notes on her computer. "You have documentation that your HOA fees were current." I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank statements. She nodded, making more notes. "And the tenants, they paid money to the HOA, $12,000. First month, last month, and security deposit. So we're talking about significant amounts of money. Can you estimate the total value involved?" I did some quick mental math. The tenants paid $12,000. My house rents for about $2,500 a month in this market, so over a 6-month lease, the HOA stood to collect $15,000 total. They've already collected $12,000. And you had no knowledge of any of this? None. I was out of the country on business. Detective Chen leaned back in her chair. "Okay, here's what I'm seeing. This could be criminal fraud, theft, and potentially identity theft if anyone forged your signature on documents. I'm going to open an investigation. I'll need you to provide copies of all your documentation, bank statements, the fake lease, everything. I'm also going to want to interview Patricia Holloway and examine the HOA's financial records. How long will that take? Depends on what we find. But I can tell you this, Mr. Porter. If this is what it looks like, someone's going to face criminal charges. California doesn't take kindly to people stealing real property." I left the police station feeling marginally better. At least the wheels were in motion. I drove back to the Hampton Inn and spent the afternoon on my laptop, documenting everything. I printed out bank statements, screenshots of my security camera app showing the cameras going offline, photos of the strangers in my house, copies of the fraudulent lease, everything. David called me back around 4 p.m. "Good news. I filed the emergency motion and we have a hearing scheduled for Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. The judge is taking this seriously." I also sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA and Patricia Holloway, demanding they immediately vacate the tenants and return possession to you. What are the chances the judge rules in our favor? High. You have clear documentation that you're current on your fees. The HOA's actions appear to be completely without legal basis. The only question is whether the tenants will have to leave immediately or whether they'll get a few days to find somewhere else to go. I feel bad for them, I admitted. They're victims too. They are. And honestly, they might have a case against the HOA as well for fraudulent inducement. But that's their lawyer's problem, not ours. Tuesday passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I met with David at his office to go over our presentation for the hearing. We organized all my documentation into neat folders with labeled tabs. David drafted a brief outlining the legal issues and explaining why the court should grant immediate relief. "One more thing," David said as we wrapped up. "I did some digging into the Meadowbrook HOA's finances. They're supposed to file annual reports with the California Department of Real Estate. I pulled the last 3 years. He slid a stack of papers across his desk. I scanned them, not sure what I was looking at. "Look at the reserve fund," David said, pointing. "It's gone down significantly over the past 2 years. They should have about $200,000 in reserves for a community your size. They have less than $50,000. Where did the money go? That's the question. There are some large expenses listed as administrative costs and legal fees, but they're vague. I'm wondering if your situation isn't an isolated incident. If Patricia needed money to cover shortfalls, she might have pulled this scam before. We need to find out. The police can subpoena the detailed financial records. For our purposes, it's enough to show that the HOA had financial motive to commit fraud." Wednesday morning arrived cold and overcast. I met David at the courthouse at 8:30. We went through security, and made our way to the courtroom where Judge Margaret Thornton would hear our emergency motion. Patricia Holloway was already there with a lawyer I didn't recognize, a nervous-looking young man in an ill-fitting suit who kept adjusting his glasses. Patricia wore a navy blue blazer and white blouse, the picture of suburban respectability. When she saw me, her expression hardened. The bailiff called our case at 9:15. David and I sat at the plaintiff's table while Patricia and her attorney sat at the defense table. Judge Thornton was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. She reviewed the papers in front of her, then looked up. "Mr. Reeves, this is your motion. Please proceed." David stood and launched into our argument, methodically laying out the facts. He presented my bank statements showing current HOA payments, the fraudulent default notices, the lease agreement signed without my knowledge or consent, and the fact that I had returned from a business trip to find strangers occupying my home. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of fraud and theft," David concluded. "Mr. Porter is the lawful owner of his property. He has never been in default. The HOA had no legal authority to lease his property. We're asking for an immediate order restoring him to possession and requiring the HOA to return all rental proceeds." Judge Thornton turned to Patricia's attorney. "Counsel." The young lawyer stood, fumbling with his papers. "Your Honor, the HOA followed proper procedures as outlined in the community bylaws. Notices were sent. When they were not responded to, the HOA exercised its legitimate authority to recover unpaid fees." "Were the fees actually unpaid?" Judge Thornton asked sharply. "According to the HOA's records, yes. But according to Mr. Porter's bank records, no. Can you explain that discrepancy?" The attorney looked at Patricia, who whispered something to him. He turned back to the judge. "There may have been a processing error, Your Honor. But that doesn't change the fact that the HOA acted in good faith based on the records it had." "Good faith?" Judge Thornton's eyebrows rose. "Counsel, even if there had been a legitimate default, which the evidence strongly suggests there was not, the HOA's remedy is to file a lien and potentially foreclose. You don't just seize someone's property and rent it out. That's not how any of this works." Patricia's attorney had no response to that. Judge Thornton looked down at the papers again. "I'm granting the plaintiff's motion. The tenants currently occupying Mr. Porter's property must vacate within 48 hours. The HOA is ordered to return all rental proceeds to Mr. Porter immediately. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Porter's reasonable hotel expenses incurred during this debacle." She looked at Patricia over her reading glasses. "Miss Holloway, I strongly suggest the HOA board seek competent legal counsel and conduct a thorough internal investigation into how this happened. This court does not look kindly on organizations that abuse their authority." "Your Honor," Patricia's attorney said weakly, "the tenants have nowhere to go on 48 hours' notice. That's unfortunate, but it's not Mr. Porter's problem. The HOA created this situation, and the HOA can help those tenants find alternative housing. Motion granted." She banged her gavel and moved on to the next case. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. David shook my hand. "That went about as well as it could have. You'll be back in your house by Friday." As we left the courtroom, Patricia tried to approach me, but David stepped between us. "No contact with my client, Miss Holloway. Any communication goes through me." She glared at him but didn't say anything. Later that afternoon, David received a call from Patricia's attorney. The HOA was requesting an extension of the 48-hour deadline to help the tenants find somewhere to stay. David refused. The court had issued its order, and we expected compliance. Thursday morning, I drove past my house and saw a moving truck in the driveway. Jennifer and her husband were loading furniture, their children sitting on the curb looking confused and sad. I felt terrible for them, but there was nothing I could do. They had been caught up in Patricia's scheme just like me. By Friday afternoon, they were gone. David and I met at the house with a locksmith to change all the locks. As I walked through my home for the first time in almost a month, I felt violated. My space had been invaded, my privacy shattered. The house was clean, at least. Jennifer had been a good tenant, but it wasn't the same. I spent the weekend cleaning and reorganizing, trying to make the space feel like mine again. I also discovered that my security cameras hadn't just gone offline. They had been physically disabled. Someone had cut the wires. That meant Patricia or someone working for her had entered my property and deliberately destroyed my security system before placing the tenants. I documented this new evidence and sent photos to both David and Detective Chen. The following Tuesday, David filed our full civil lawsuit against the Meadowbrook HOA, Patricia Holloway personally, and 3 other board members who had allegedly approved the rental scheme. We were suing for fraud, conversion, trespass, breach of fiduciary duty, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We demanded actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The damages added up quickly. We calculated the rental value of my house during the time I was excluded from it, my hotel expenses, the cost to replace my security system, David's attorney fees, and the value of my time and emotional suffering. We were asking for $200,000. Detective Chen called me on Wednesday. "Mr. Porter, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We executed a search warrant on the HOA's financial records. What we found is pretty damning. Tell me, this isn't the first time Patricia Holloway has done something like this. Over the past 18 months, there have been 3 other properties in the Meadowbrook community where she claimed the owners were in default and either collected excessive fees or, in one case, rented out the property while the owner was away. The other owners either didn't notice or didn't fight back. How much money are we talking about? North of $100,000. She was depositing the money into the HOA account, but then writing checks to herself for various fake expenses. She's been embezzling from the community for at least 2 years. That's a felony. Multiple felonies. We're building a case for grand theft, embezzlement, fraud, and burglary for the security camera situation. The district attorney's office is reviewing everything now. I expect charges will be filed within the next few weeks. What about the other board members? That's trickier. It looks like Patricia kept most of this hidden from them. They signed off on some things without really reviewing the details. They might face civil liability, but probably not criminal charges unless we find evidence they knew what was happening. And the tenants who were in my house, they're victims. We're not charging them with anything. Actually, they've filed their own police report for fraud. They want their $12,000 back. I felt a grim satisfaction. Patricia Holloway's house of cards was collapsing. Over the next month, several things happened in rapid succession. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Patricia for grand theft, embezzlement, fraud, and burglary. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted, but she was ordered to surrender her passport and stay in California. The Meadowbrook HOA held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. They also voted to hire a forensic accountant to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances. When the audit was complete, it revealed even more problems. Patricia had been skimming money for years, using various schemes to hide the theft. The HOA filed insurance claims to try to recover some of the stolen money. Their insurance company started its own investigation and eventually agreed to pay out policy limits, which helped but didn't cover everything. David and I proceeded with our civil lawsuit. We took Patricia's deposition, where she sat across from us in a conference room and refused to answer most questions, invoking her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Her criminal attorney had clearly advised her to say nothing. We also deposed the other board members, who were cooperative and seemed genuinely shocked by what Patricia had done. They provided emails and meeting minutes that showed Patricia had been making unilateral decisions and presenting falsified reports to the board. In one particularly damaging email chain, another board member had questioned some unusual expenses, and Patricia had responded with a detailed explanation that we could now prove was completely fabricated. The case moved toward trial, but most civil cases settle before reaching a courtroom. David opened settlement negotiations with the HOA's insurance company and with Patricia's attorney. The insurance company offered $50,000 to make the case go away. David countered with $150,000. We eventually settled at $90,000, with the insurance company agreeing to pay and the HOA admitting no wrongdoing beyond Patricia's unauthorized actions. Patricia was a harder nut to crack. She initially refused to settle at all, insisting she had done nothing wrong. But as the criminal case against her strengthened and the evidence mounted, her attorney convinced her that she needed to resolve the civil case to show remorse and cooperation, which might help her in criminal sentencing. We settled with Patricia personally for an additional $75,000 to be paid out of the proceeds from selling her house. She had no choice. Between the criminal fines, restitution orders, and civil judgments, she was financially ruined. The tenants, Jennifer and her family, also settled with the HOA for a return of their $12,000 plus an additional $8,000 for their moving expenses and damages. I was glad they got something back. 8 months after I first came home to find strangers in my house, Patricia Holloway stood before Judge Thornton for criminal sentencing. She had pled guilty to 3 counts of grand theft and 1 count of embezzlement as part of a plea deal with the DA's office. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked diminished somehow, smaller than the imperious HOA president who had made my life difficult for 2 years. Her attorney made a plea for leniency, talking about her service to the community and her lack of prior criminal record. The prosecutor told a different story, describing a woman who had systematically stolen from her neighbors, abused her position of trust, and shown no remorse until she was caught. Judge Thornton listened to both sides, then looked at Patricia. "Miss Holloway, you were given a position of responsibility in your community. People trusted you to manage their money and act in their best interests. Instead, you stole from them. You created elaborate schemes to hide your theft. You violated Mr. Porter's home and privacy. Your actions weren't a momentary lapse in judgment. They were calculated and repeated over years." Patricia stood silently, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'm sentencing you to 4 years in state prison, with credit for time served. You'll also pay full restitution to all victims, which the court calculates at approximately $180,000. After your release, you'll serve 3 years of supervised probation." Patricia's attorney had hoped for probation, maybe some county jail time at most. 4 years in state prison was a real sentence. Patricia's face crumpled and she started crying. The bailiff led her away in handcuffs. As I left the courthouse, I felt a complicated mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, anger at what had been done to me, sadness at the waste of it all. Patricia had thrown away her life for what? $180,000. It seemed so pointless. David caught up with me in the parking lot. Well, that's done. How are you feeling? Honestly, exhausted. I just want to move on with my life. The settlement checks should clear next week. Between the insurance payout and Patricia's payment, you're getting $165,000. That's about what we asked for after attorney fees, including the rent money they collected. Every dollar they made from renting your place, plus all your expenses, plus compensation for your suffering and trouble. You won, Ethan, completely. I nodded slowly. The money was nice, but what I really wanted was something I couldn't get back, the sense of security in my own home. Even now, months later, I sometimes came home and felt a spike of anxiety, wondering if something would be wrong. I'm thinking about selling the house, I said. Moving to a place without an HOA. David laughed. I don't blame you, though I should mention most HOAs aren't like this. Patricia was an aberration. Maybe, but I think I've had enough of homeowners associations for one lifetime. We shook hands and parted ways. I drove back to my house, which was truly mine again. All locks changed, new security cameras installed with backup battery systems, and not a single violation notice from the HOA in months. The Meadowbrook community had elected a new board, people who actually seemed to care about serving their neighbors rather than wielding petty power. They had apologized profusely for what happened and assured me it would never happen again. They had also changed the bylaws to require multiple board members to sign off on any major decisions and to mandate external audits every year. I appreciated the changes, but the damage was done. I listed the house for sale 2 weeks later. Within a month, I had an offer at asking price from a young couple who seemed excited about the neighborhood. I told them the whole story about Patricia and the HOA, not wanting anyone to buy the place without knowing its history. They laughed it off. Every neighborhood has drama, the wife said. At least yours is resolved, and the new board seems great. Maybe she was right, but I was ready for something different. The settlement money came through just as David had promised. $165,000 deposited into my bank account. I paid David's remaining fees, which the settlement hadn't fully covered, and put the rest toward my next home. I found a small house in Corona, about 20 miles away, in a neighborhood with no HOA. The house was older and had less curb appeal than my Meadowbrook place, but it was mine in a way the other place never really felt again after everything that happened. On the day I moved out of the Meadowbrook house, I did one final walk through. The new owners weren't moving in for another week, so the place was empty. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I moved from room to room, remembering. I had bought this house with such optimism 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a new chapter, a sign of my success and stability. Instead, it had become a nightmare that taught me hard lessons about trusting the wrong people and the importance of protecting what's yours. In the living room, I stood where I had stood that first day home from Singapore, looking at a stranger holding a dish towel in my doorway. It felt like a lifetime ago. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Saw the news. Patricia was transferred to state prison this morning. It's really over now. I typed back a quick thanks and pocketed my phone. He was right. It was over. Patricia was in prison serving a 4-year sentence. The HOA had been reformed. I had been compensated for my losses. Justice, as much as we ever get it in this world, had been served. But standing in that empty house, I realized something important. This had never really been about the money or even about revenge. It was about the principle that someone can't just take what's yours, that actions have consequences, that you have to stand up for yourself even when it's hard and expensive and exhausting. I had done that. I had fought back against someone who abused her power, who thought she could get away with stealing from me because I was traveling and wouldn't notice. I had held her accountable, and in doing so, had protected other homeowners in the community from being her next victims. That mattered more than any settlement check. I locked the door one last time and slid the keys into the lockbox for the new owners. As I drove away from Meadowbrook, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the tree-lined streets and tidy houses. It was a nice neighborhood, objectively. Maybe the new owners would be happy there, but I was heading somewhere better. Somewhere without a HOA president who thought she could rent out my house while I was gone. Somewhere I could leave my trash cans visible from the street if I wanted to without getting a violation notice. Somewhere I could just live in peace. My new house in Corona was waiting. It was smaller and older, with a yard that needed work and interior paint that was 15 years out of date. But it was mine, all mine, with no homeowners association to answer to. I pulled into the driveway of my new place and sat for a moment, engine idling. The house looked welcoming in the afternoon sun. A neighbor was walking a dog down the street and waved at me. I waved back. This was going to be good. A fresh start, lessons learned, and enough money in the bank from the settlement to make some updates and improvements. I had won every dollar the HOA had made from renting my house, plus compensation for everything they had put me through. But more than that, I had won something else. The knowledge that I could fight back against injustice and win. That I didn't have to accept being victimized. That the system, for all its flaws, sometimes actually works. I climbed out of the car and unlocked my new front door. The house smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I had a lot of unpacking to do, furniture to arrange, a life to rebuild. But first, I was going to sit on my back patio, crack open a beer, and enjoy the simple pleasure of being in my own home, with no HOA to answer to and no Patricia Holloway to make my life miserable. I had been through hell over the past year, but I had come out the other side. Bruised, maybe. Wiser, definitely, and victorious in every way that mattered. The sun was setting over Corona as I sat on my patio, watching the sky turn orange and purple. My phone buzzed again, another message from David. Forgot to tell you. Jennifer and her husband sent a thank you card to the office. They said they appreciated how you handled everything and that your case helped them get their money back. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled and typed back. Good. Glad something positive came out of this mess. And there had been positive things, I realized. The HOA had reformed itself. Patricia was facing consequences for her crimes. Jennifer and her family had recovered their losses. Other potential victims had been spared. The system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. As for me, I was moving forward. The settlement money would help me make this new house everything I wanted it to be. My job was going well, with more travel on the horizon, but this time I wasn't worried about what I might find when I came home. I had learned to protect myself, to document everything, to fight back when necessary. The stars were coming out now, visible in a way they never had been in suburban Meadowbrook with all its streetlights. I could get used to this, I thought. A quieter life, fewer rules, more freedom. My phone buzzed one more time. It was a LinkedIn message from another homeowner in Meadowbrook, someone I barely knew. I heard about what happened with Patricia. Thank you for standing up to her. She sent me violation notices constantly, and I always felt like she was targeting me but could never prove anything. Knowing she's facing justice helps. Hope you're doing well. I read the message twice, then typed a response. Thanks for reaching out. Standing up to bullies is always worth it, even when it's hard. Best of luck in the neighborhood. I put my phone away and finished my beer, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow I would start unpacking in earnest, turning this house into a home. But tonight, I was going to sit here and appreciate what I had fought for and won, the right to live in peace. The satisfaction of justice served. The knowledge that when someone tries to take what's yours, you can fight back and win. Patricia Holloway had learned a hard lesson, one that would cost her 4 years of her life. She had thought she could abuse her position, steal from her neighbors, and face no consequences. She had been wrong. And I had learned something too. That fighting back is hard and expensive and stressful, but sometimes it's necessary. That the law, when properly invoked, can be a powerful tool for justice. That standing up for yourself not only protects you but can protect others who might have been victims in the future. The night air was cool and clean. Inside my new house, I could see boxes stacked in the living room, waiting to be unpacked. My whole life packed up and ready for a fresh start. I stood up, stretched, and headed inside. Tomorrow would be busy, but tonight I was at peace. The nightmare was over. Patricia was in prison. The money was in my bank account. And I was home, really home, in a place that was entirely mine. As I locked the back door and turned off the patio light, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pure, uncomplicated contentment. The battle was over and I had won. Not just won, but won completely, claiming every dollar the HOA had made from their illegal scheme and then some. It was enough. More than enough. It was justice, and it was sweet. I climbed the stairs to my new bedroom, ready for the first night of sleep in a house that no HOA could touch, where no Patricia Holloway could cause me trouble, where I was finally, completely, blissfully free. The end of this chapter of my life, and the beginning of something better.